to take either enforcement action or use force. And so there's always a officer, nurse, and community safety component to it that has to be carefully considered. So that's why the mobile crisis teams in every model are not first responders. They don't arrive when the event is at its highest. They may arrive at the same time as your primary response units do. But in order for operational clarity, we've referred to the mobile crisis teams as secondary response. I don't want to leave any impression with anybody in the community or with the board that that means the mobile crisis teams are waiting in the shed for a call to come out. When they're on the road, they get called or they hear a call. To the extent that they've got the capacity, they'll be moving at the same time. And when they arrive, they respond to the situation in concert with the primary response. And if you would permit me, I would like to point out that the availability of the crisis teams is a limited resource, but that by no means should leave the impression with the community that the areas that aren't serviced by mobile crisis teams are unsupported. There's no support at all. In fact, this board knows that over 2 to 3 million times a year we have encounters with the public, and those encounters turn out to be quite safe and benign. And indeed, the vast number of events where police officers actually have to take enforcement action results in very few use of force incidents. And I bring attention to the board, just an article in our newspaper, the Toronto Police Badge, where 2 primary response officers are being recognized for handling a situation very safely, very compassionately, and very effectively. A person in crisis who was armed with a weapon, who was not only threatening harm to herself but to others. The 2 primary response officers, by themselves, safely diffuse this. And I would suggest that this is the standard by which we should be judged, because this is the more common encounter than the ones that might get headlines. So while the mobile crisis team are enjoying a great deal of success and acceptance in the community, it should not be left with nobody should be left with the impression that the primary response aren't very effectively dealing with crisis in the community on their own. This is part of a full collaborative response. Appreciate the opportunity to say that.
Colleagues, any other questions? Councillor Carroll?
Yeah, I don't quite understand the answer around where the report is at. Are we going to be delivered the report with 25 recommendations? And even this report is for receipt, so I don't even know what happens with the 5 key recommendations that the presentation is sharing with us. When do we get the report and the other 25?
So the report was, that's a great question. The report was commissioned by the Toronto Central Lynn Mobile Crisis Team Steering Committee.
Right.
So they received the report. The report is now a public report, having been tabled at this board meeting, so the public can have access to it, and the board can consider. It doesn't require the board to respond.
That's the part I don't understand about the answer. Tabled at this committee? What do you mean this committee?
2
this
things.
Board?
It's for the board to be aware of. It's a document that the board did not commission. It was commissioned by the Toronto Central Lynn.
But it isn't tabled here because it's not here.
Well, the board received it, so...
So, am I missing something?
In fact, the board's mental health subcommittee received copies of the report for their deliberations, so the report's available.
Has it come before?
It was mentioned in the report that's before you, so
Right.
we did request a copy, so we do have it available now for you.
So,
But it's not been submitted as a formal part of this agenda, I don't think.
No, it's not a report that compels the board to do anything. This was recommendations made to the steering committee for consideration, and the board is receiving it as far as a public notification, public information exercise.
I think there's enough questions around it. It might be useful, because I agree with you, the subcommittee, the mental health subcommittee and Pat Camone's committee has seen it and discussed it. But I think given the discussions here, it might be useful at the next meeting to have the report before us. And also, I just like, I know you know the Hamilton and Niagara response, but is there anybody in Canada that's doing mobile crisis intervention units as first responders, to
No.
just get some
I'm not quite
clarification on
finished
that.
getting the answers to my questions yet.
Okay, sorry, no, I thought
Yeah,
this
so I'm not quite finished getting the answers to my questions. So some part of the board has seen it. So back to the question, I have a report for receipt, but it actually highlights 5 recommendations that I'm assuming that because they're presented here, that it is the opinion of the service that they are the 5 key recommendations.
Well, let me
So
tell you my
what is
understanding.
going to
The-
happen with them?
The board is not being presented with the report. The board was just receiving a presentation on the evaluation that was done of the mobile crisis team by the CRICH, commissioned by the Toronto Central Mobile Crisis Team Steering Committee. So the board was not receiving the report as...
No, that's true, but I received this presentation, and I'm assuming that if it's before the board, that the service first looked at the presentation.
The service carefully...
be true?
Well, the service was part of the evaluation, and the recommendations were incorporated into our response to people in crisis and
Okay.
police dealing with emotionally disturbed people.
I'm not trying to be difficult. We have before us an item that says we're going to get a presentation. I'm assuming that before that presentation would be made here, and this is a simple yes or no answer, that the service saw this presentation. Is that true?
Yes.
Then can I also assume, and this is again another yes or no answer, can I assume that if you saw it, that you are comfortable with the fact that these 5 key recommendations are, you concur that these are the key recommendations? Is that true?
Key recommendations of this
There are
evaluation?
5 key recommendations out of the 25 in here. Can I assume that because they're being presented before the board and it was looked at by the service beforehand, that you concur that those are the 5 key recommendations?
Out of that evaluation.
Okay.
Sure.
So the question then is, they're before us, what further action is going to be taken on them? It's nice to highlight that it's a key recommendation that perhaps MCIT should be in plain clothes. Is the service going to act on that? Because part of that team is a service member.
Right. So the service has responded to these recommendations as part of its overall response to the reviews by JK and Yakubuchi, because those reviews incorporated the recommendations that arose out of the CRICH study. So it's part of it. Specifically, if you're asking me, am I going to accept 1 or 2 of the recommendations? It depends on what recommendation we're talking about. If you're talking about co-responding or first responders, the answer to that is the teams will only be co-responders. They won't be, under the current model, they will not be first responders. In other words, I am not going to send or recommend sending a mobile crisis team to a call unless the PRU are there as well. So they're not going by themselves.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over because now the motion that Dr. Naria is going to move, I really look forward to supporting it. Really, because I think it'll be helpful.
Other questions? Ken or Marie, do you have any questions? If not, Dr. Nuria?
We've heard a lot around the table, very interesting recommendations, etc. But as a board member, what I would like is for the Toronto Police Service to bring the full report of the MCIT to the full board with all of the recommendations. We've had key recommendations given to us today, and Mr. Sewell brought on other recommendations that we don't have on our file to review. So first thing is I would like to have the full report and all the recommendations. Number 2, we also heard from you that a number of these recommendations are already implemented. So if you can analyze what the recommendations are on one side, what are the ones that we've fulfilled, and what is the work in progress, I think that way all of us would be open, transparent, and know where we are, what do we have to do further. And I think we'd be better able to handle this situation than to discuss it for another hour here. So in all fairness to all the parties, I would like to make that motion, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Any questions? May I have a seconder for? Councillor Carroll, fine. All in favor? Any contrary? Deputy, thank you very much. And I think there's enough interest in this and recognizing the work that's been done. I think the board would appreciate And I know the Mental Health Subcommittee has gone through it, but I think the board would very much appreciate it. In the light of the evidence, I think we want to make sure we've gone through it more thoroughly and consider it at the next meeting, if that's
Yeah,
possible.
absolutely agreeable. The purpose behind the presentation was to inform the board for the board's own purposes. So if this is,
You've informed and caught our attention, so thank you.
mandate served, thanks.
Great. Thanks very much. We're going to jump around a bit, I think, to